chapter. This is Jesus predicting his death a second time. Let us listen for God's word. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." This is the word of the Lord. One of my favorite plays, movies, musicals is Fiddler on the Roof. Most think of the production as that father who's looking for successful husbands for his daughters. And a rather pointed moment in that production is when the father, Tevye, is at the town pub and he runs into the town butcher who is interested in one of Tevye's daughters. However, the conversation that ensues is just a little bit confusing because upon approach by the butcher, Tevye tells the butcher he knows what the butcher has come to discuss and there's no way they're going to talk about it. And the butcher kind of wonders why not. And Tevye tells the butcher, he says, "Well, why should I get rid of her?" And the butcher says, "Well, you've got a few more without her." And Tevye says, "I see, today you want one and tomorrow you may want two." And the butcher's sitting there going, "What would I do with two?" And Tevye goes, "The same thing you'll do with one." And the butcher asks, "What in the world are you talking about?" And Tevye says, "Well, I know you're talking about my new cow. That's what you're wanting to buy from me." And the butcher goes, "No, I'm talking about your daughter Zidal." You know, this whole story reminds us about how easy it is to misinterpret and misunderstand. You know, for instance, to what family does the firefly belong? What? It's a beetle. Yeah, you're right. And did you know that the banana tree is not a tree, it's an herb? I have a big herb growing in my backyard. And the cucumber is not a vegetable, it's a fruit. And that panda bear, you know that panda bear is really a relative of the raccoon. It's not a bear at all. You know, and in this world of make-believe and misunderstanding, a world where plastic looks like wood and natural foods are artificially flavored and preserved, it's a struggle sometimes to find our way through to true comprehension and understanding. And this was the struggle Jesus' disciples were having. Jesus is teaching the disciples with private, intensive, educational lessons focused on the message the disciples least wanted to hear. And furthermore, they most stubbornly were refusing to comprehend what he was saying. Because Jesus was telling them about the approaching trials and the persecution. In the gospel passage that I read, Jesus tells the disciples for a second time about a frightening future. And he tells it in chilling detail that I imagine really gnawed at the disciples' hearts. He told them that the Son of Man was going to be delivered into human hands. He was going to be betrayed, and that betrayal was going to result in his death. And yet the amazing thing is, even though the disciples didn't understand what Jesus was saying, they were too afraid to even ask him to explain himself. Too afraid to even ask him to explain himself. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been at a place when you were too afraid to ask for an explanation? You know, restructuring at work, and the boss lays out this new grand design, and you're just too afraid to ask how you're going to fit into this grand equation. Or maybe you finally decide to purchase the latest piece of technological creation, and you go to Bowling Green to Best Buy, and the 19-year-old sales associate begins showing you this dream high-tech toy and explains the thousands of buttons that when you push, they'll do everything but prepare your dinner. And then she says, "Do you have any questions?" Yeah. You've got questions, all right. You've got so many questions, you don't even know which one sounds less silly than the other one. And so you smile, and you look at the floor, and you rub your hand over your new gadget, and you find yourself saying something like, "So, you say it comes with how many RAMs, and the RAMs are self-maintained, and I won't have to do anything?" Or maybe you just stare in stunned silence, and like the disciples, you take your new toy and you just leave the store. Jesus took his silent disciples, and then they continued on through Galilee, leaving there. They entered Capernaum as Jesus continued on with his educational journey. And they take up in private homes, Jesus teaching the disciples in the midst of all the chores going on in the house, children running around everywhere, meals being prepared. Here they are, they're just off the road, they're sitting there untying their sandals, maybe getting a cool drink, and Jesus says, "You know, guys, back there on the road, you were having a conversation amongst yourselves, and I just couldn't help overhearing what you were saying. So why don't you just now tell me about this little dissension that you were having over who among you is the greatest?" Oops, the teacher heard us. We're caught. The disciples were startled. They were guilty, and they were silent. Been there? Once upon a time, the school teacher was known to grab the notes that were being passed from desk to desk in the classroom. Now, don't they grab your phone and start reading your text messages? If you get that command from the teacher, why don't you just now come right on up here and you just read this to the entire class? Do they do that? In front of everyone in the house, Jesus says to the disciples, "Why don't you just come right up here and share your argument about who among you is the greatest with all of the folks here?" There was a man who was just a bit egotistical, and he was obsessed with being number one. He never stopped talking about being number one in sales at the office. He proclaimed he was first in line for the next promotion. He had to be first in line to buy the ticket for the game, and then he had to be first to hit the parking lot after the game. Well, one day he and his wife were at the mall, and there was one of those tell your weight and fortune machines. So the man went over and he stepped up on the scale and he slid in his dollar bill, and out came this little card, and the little card read, "You are a born leader. superior intelligence. You are attractive to the opposite sex. And the man, gloating, he handed the card to his wife and he goes, "Read that." And she did. She read it. And then she turned over the card and she says, "Yeah, well, they got your weight wrong too." Jesus begins the process of helping his disciples to understand that whoever wants to be first must be last of all. Even more, must be servant to all. So much for their petty squabbling about who was destined to be the greatest. This instruction from Jesus seems to be similar to the conversation James was having with the Christians in the passage that Debbie read. There seems to be a rather brutal censoring of the people to whom James wrote. James asks, "Who among you is full of wisdom and understanding?" A wisdom that is not of this world, but a wisdom that is from above. And James says, by a good life, let that person show their works in the meekness of wisdom. What James is seeking to do is to confront the readers with the reality that if they were really wise and understanding, they would not be in whatever mess they are in right now. Part of Christian understanding is a certain humility. Do you know the origin of that word, humility? Yeah, it comes from the word humus, which means dirt. Jesus identified humility as necessary for true worth. The greatest among us must be last of all and servant of all. And this word that he used, humility, humus, he's not talking about just any old dirt. No, he's talking about the good stuff. He's talking about the stuff that is fertile and that is productive. The stuff that will nourish a seed, that will let it grow, that will let it flourish. The good stuff. And so too, our humility makes us a servant who can nourish others, who can cause good works to flourish, who can bring growth. We need a certain element of humility in what we claim we understand. Misunderstanding can distort our views, distort our perceptions. It muddles our choices, it muddles our relationships, it produces divisions and disputes. No, we will not always fully understand. But that is where trust comes in. We must trust God's wisdom. And that is what Jesus was asking of the confused disciples. To trust. To trust that his death was a clue to what life is really about. What life is really about. Humble servanthood. When followers of Jesus stop wrangling around among themselves about status long enough to follow Christ, when we pick up our crosses, when we pick up our responsibilities and show hospitality and kindness to the powerless, to the outcast, to the lonesome, to the ones that are down on their luck, to the ones that are sick and grieving, we discover that we've not only received a stranger, but we have received Jesus Christ himself. That was the reason Jesus took that little child, that one who had no status, that one who was replaceable, and said, "Whoever welcomes one such child as this in my name welcomes me." In the letter from James, we heard that wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. It is living by that wisdom from above that opens our hearts to our neighbor and to one another. This is the reason that we participate in people serving people meals, why we install water systems with Living Waters for the World, why we sponsor monthly blood drives, why we do the Christmas Child, White Christmas, why we provide food and money to Good Samaritan, why we are striving to work more closely with the Boys and Girls Club, why we are wrestling with how to make this facility more functional and welcoming in preparation for new programs and ministries. I want to go back to where I began this morning with Fiddler on the Roof. The profound message of this production is that without tradition, our lives would be as precarious and as shaky as a fiddler perched on a rooftop. We must be reliant on our faith and tradition throughout the changes and turbulence of time. This congregation has a long tradition of many things that has held you steadfast in trying and turbulent times. Your faith undergirded those traditions. Long after I retire and another pastor stands in this place, by God's grace and your reliance on God's wisdom and understanding, those traditions will live on, and lives in Simpson County and the surrounding area will continue to be touched in meaningful ways. Do you remember playing that child's game, Button, Button, Who's Got the Button? Remember that game? If you don't remember, it's a game where you sit in a circle and you pass a button hand to hand behind the backs of those in the circle. They're all in a circle and you're passing this button along hand to hand. And the person that is in the center of the circle tries to guess who has the button. Well, perhaps this morning we can visualize that game. But the button being passed is the wisdom and understanding of God. That special wisdom and understanding that leads to caring for and about other people and leads to serving others. A button that is passed along quietly, subtly, from one person to the next, from hand to hand, from heart to heart, not calling attention, fully understanding what it is to pass along the tradition of Christ, Christ ministry, Christ love, Christ compassion to a world filled with need. Button, button. Do we have the button? Amen.